Now that you understand layering in Photoshop as well as making selections in Photoshop, in this section, you're going to learn about masking. So what is masking? Masking is basically erasing. It's a term from the old school photography in the darkroom. But we use masking instead of erasing, and this is very important because it's non-destructive erasing, basically. So when you erase with the erase tool, you're just basically getting rid of those pixels. So if you had a photo and you have a forest, for example, and then you had a photo of a beach below, and you just want to erase some of the trees so the beach shows through. If you erase, you can't get those trees back except by going back in the history panel, going to window then history, or just going to edit, undo, edit, step backward a bunch of times. So instead of having to deal with that hassle, you can just use masking. So masking, basically, you add a layer mask to a layer, and then you paint black onto it, and then it will mask out that layer and show through the layer below it, just like if you're erasing. But the cool thing is, and this is why we mask instead of erase, you can paint white onto that layer mask, and it will bring those pixels back. This will make sense in the following lessons. And if you want a layer to just be partially masked or erased, you can just paint a grayscale. Just paint gray in that area, something on the scale between black and white, and then would only partially mask it. So you can make a selection of something, say a car. Hit the Add Layer Mask button on the bottom of the Layers panel. It'll mask out everything but what you had selected. And then you can still edit it by painting in black and white on the mask. So let's get started in masking, and in this section you're going to do some follow-along things as well. Instead of just following along with functions and tools and things like that, you're going to apply what you've learned regarding layering and selections and masking and do a couple real-world techniques. All right, thanks. One of the most important techniques in Photoshop to know is masking. Masking is a way to toggle visibility of pixels in a layer, but it's different and superior to simply erasing. I'll explain. Open masking.psd in Photoshop. This file has two layers. With the top layer selected in the Layers panel, select the Eraser tool and select a soft edge brush. Click and drag in the canvas and it removes pixels. If we wanted these pixels back, we'd need to go to Edit, Undo, or go back in the History panel to a certain number of steps. There's a better way, though, to remove visibility of pixels. Instead of choosing the Eraser tool, navigate to the bottom of the Layers panel. Making sure the top layer is highlighted, click the Add Layer Mask icon on the bottom of the Layers panel. Notice it added a white box next to the layer. This is the layer mask, and by default it's white, so it has no effect on the layer. Choose the brush tool in the toolbar, and then click the foreground color and select black. Making sure the layer mask is selected, click and drag in the photo and it will mask out the pixels. Set the foreground color to white and click and drag, and it'll bring the pixels back. So this is non-destructive editing. If we painted gray in, the pixels would be partially maxed out. Quick tip, press D on the keyboard or click to the left and above the foreground color picker to set the foreground and background to white and black. Then press X on the keyboard to flip them. This is much faster than selecting black and then white on the bottom of the toolbar. Next, we'll create a layer mask from a selection. Click and drag the layer mask to the trash and delete it. Click Delete. In the last lecture, we added to a mask by using the brush tool. Now let's make a mask from a selection. This will mask out everything except the selection. For this example, I'm going to click in the blue sky with the magic wand tool. Make sure contiguous on the options bar is unchecked. to select all areas with similar pixels instead of just adjacent areas to the clicked point. Next, go to Select, Inverse. This made the selection the telephone pole and wires instead of the area around them. Now click on the Add Layer Mask icon on the bottom of the Layers panel. Alt-click on the PC or Option-click on the Mac on the mask in the Layers panel, and it'll show what our mask looks like. Alt or Option-click it again to toggle that off. This mask can be edited. Add to it by painting in black. And bring back visibility by painting in white. Again, I'm pressing X to flip the white and black foreground and background color. Next, we'll complete 3 fun, real-world style exercises using some of the things we've learned. Now let's make some text made up of photos. Open lake.jpg in Photoshop. And select the Type tool on the toolbar. Click somewhere in the canvas and type out a word such as lake. Select the Move tool and make sure Show Transform Controls is checked. If you clicked and dragged out a text box rather than just clicking, you'll need to hold Control on the PC or Command on the Mac. Otherwise, click and drag the corner of the text area to resize the text. Hold Shift if you want to maintain original proportion. And then press Enter to apply this resize. Another way to resize it is to highlight the text and then manually change the font size up in the options bar. Double-click the T in the type layer to select the text if you need to. After highlighting the text with the Type tool, change the font typeface to a thicker font. Try Impact or something similar. Next, double-click the background layer to make it a normal layer. Click OK. Drag the photo layer above the type layer in the Layers panel. Then, holding down Alt on the PC or Option on the Mac, hover your mouse in between the 2 layers on the Layers panel. Then click. There we go, a clipping mask that's a little different than regular masking, but is a pretty cool effect. We can still edit the text, move around the layer. We can still edit the text, move around the type layer, and add a background as well by adding a new layer, and then filling it with the foreground color by pressing Alt Backspace on the PC or Option Delete on the Mac. And make sure you drag that new layer to the bottom of the layers. Next, we'll create an HDR effect by masking out certain areas in a landscape photo. If you search for the term HDR online, you'll see a lot of examples of HDR or high dynamic range photos. Some of these look kind of cartoonish and others look pretty realistic. This example is a bit more simple than some of those since it only has 2 layers, but the effect in this tutorial is meant to be subtle yet effective. Open sunset.jpg in Photoshop and press Ctrl-J on a PC or Command-J on a Mac to duplicate the layer. Notice that the foreground is a bit too dark. We can fix that with the levels adjustment, but then it would overexpose the background area. That's why we'll selectively adjust by using masking, keeping the background of the original layer and then keeping the foreground of the new layer. Let's rename the layers, so double-click the background layer and name it Original Layer. Double-click the layer name of the new layer and name it Foreground. We're going to adjust the levels of this foreground layer so that it applies the entire layer, and then we'll mask out the background area of the top layer. With the top layer selected, go to Image, Adjustments, Levels. Drag the midtones to the left a bit and press OK. Now click the Create Layer Mask icon. We need to mask out the top area or the background of the photo. Select the brush tool and choose a soft edge brush. And paint some black onto the background of this foreground layer. This allows the bottom original layer to show through, so we have a better exposed foreground without having a blown out background. Here's the before, and then here's the after. Next, we'll use masking in a portrait photo for selective sharpening. For the final follow-along exercise in this course, we're going to do some selective sharpening by using the brush masking technique. Open the support file kelly.jpg. Now, the first thing we want to do is duplicate the layer. If you remember, we can either click and drag it to the Create New Layer icon on the bottom of the Layers panel, but if the layer we want to duplicate is already selected in the Layers panel, which it should be since this is just a one-layer JPEG right now, we can just press Ctrl-J on the PC or Command-J on the Mac. Let's rename these layers. Double-click on the name of the background layer and rename it Original Layer. Double-click the name of the new layer and rename it Sharpened Layer. This photo is in focus, but it's not quite tack sharp. We want to sharpen my friend Kelly's face here and not the grassy area. Oftentimes in a portrait we want a blurred background with a low depth of field, but in this one the background is very close to the person, but having a slightly blurred area around her isn't a big deal, and actually preferred since it will bring attention to the face. This grassy area that's more out of focus than her face can stay blurry. What we'll do is sharpen the entire layer and then mask through this area so the original slightly blurred layer shows through in the surrounding areas. So with the top layer called Sharpened Layer selected in the Layers panel, go to Filter, Sharpen, Unsharp Mask. Experiment with the amount and radius, and make sure Preview is checked to preview the sharpening both here and on the canvas. We don't want to overdo the sharpening. Once it looks sharp without adding a grainy look, click OK. Now with the sharpened layer still selected, click Add Layer Mask on the bottom of the Layers panel. Select the brush tool and choose a soft edge brush because we don't want a noticeable edge. Then just paint some black in the outer areas so the bottom layer shows through. This is a subtle effect, but some of the best adjustments in Photoshop, at least in a photographic context, are subtle, resulting in an improved but still realistic photo.